Welcome, everybody, to our tiny desk lecture of Archival Außer Sich. My name is Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus. I'm co-director of Archival Institute for Film and Video Art. I would like to start with a photo that shows a set of objects and an audience, not in the way you would expect them in a cinema space. The screen is hidden behind the curtain. On the left, stills of films by Sergei Eisenstein. Between the seats, film boxes not used for storage, but for print traffic. On top of them, monitors. And small groups of people in front of each monitor composing a collective viewing situation. What had happened? In the early 1970s, Arsenal co-founder Ulrich Gregor visited a gallery in New York where he saw video works by the Japanese artist Keigo Yamamoto. He found them so interesting from the perspective of a film historian that not only did he bring them from New York to West Berlin across the Atlantic, although at that time New York was sometimes closer than other places in West Germany, but also out of the gallery and into the cinema. At a time before anyone ever imagined the idea of video projectors. So he asked the employees of the cinema to bring their personal TV sets from home. He set them up in the Arsenal and managed to synchronize them so that they could all be run from a single player. And everyone saw the same images, collectively, under the critical or consenting eye of Ivan the Terrible. The last edition of the Berlinale section Forum, which is independently curated and organized by Archival Institute for Film and Video Art, comprised a special program entitled Archival Constellations. We showed films that helped us look back to the history of the Forum as a section of an international film festival that has been marked by the somewhat vague term of independence. This included, for instance, the films Nuestra Voz de Tierra, Memoria y Futuro by Marta Rodriguez and Jorge Silva, about the 100-day oppression of farmers and indigenous people in Colombia and their equally long resistance, or Variety by Betty Gordon, a feminist counter-proposal to the male-dominated structure of the gaze in narrative cinema. In the program of Forum Expanded, we presented an installation by Harun Farocki, which premiered in the very first edition of Forum Expanded in 2006. It shows a sequence by Griffith from 1916's Intolerance. Farocki stated that it causes one to think that with it, the short reverse angle form of expression was invented. The constellations referred to in the title are multiple. They refer to power relations, bonds of solidarity, affinities, geopolitics, to the relationship between history, present, and future. Of course, also the relationship of cinema to social reality and thus to the other arts, and, as it is called, extra-filmic discourse. The archive of the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art encompasses around 10,000 films collected since its founding in 1963. Which, even at the time they were made, had sought to counter the already existing canon. They sought to use the possibilities of cinema to change it and thus to question power relations. Such an archive cannot per se be bound by organizational criteria. It is not a national archive. It does not depict any genre nor any historical era. It resists any kind of interpretational sovereignty. It is an archive in motion. The only thing that unifies it in this resistance is perhaps its location, the fact that it is in Berlin. For this reason, we have already been referring to it as a living archive for a long time. The archive lives through its users, who enter it with their knowledge and their research interests, thus expanding it, which is why we refer to them all as archivists. By helping the films find a new life in the present, they contribute to the archive having a future and becoming a site of production, since the first step to preserving a film is its place in the collective consciousness, especially when it is a film that has so far stood outside the canon, above all the Western canon. In the process of this engagement, in der Vergegenwärtigung, a film from the past gets a new present. Restoring and digitizing demands a lot of technical expertise, but this is, above all, also a part of this process. Here I would like to add that the fact that the archive is an international archive excludes it from archive funding, since it is not national, not considered national heritage. And this is another reason why we open the archive to the public, because with everybody who comes to the archive, we try to collaborate and to realize artistic curatorial projects that help us indirectly receive funding for digitization and restoration. Our living archive has found fellow travelers, which we are very happy about. Bernd Scherer, who saw affinities in this approach to the HKW project, The New Alphabet, invited us to take part, along with the Staatliche Kunstsammlung Dresden and the Pina Bausch Foundation in Wuppertal. In turn, we have invited others to realize a series of interdisciplinary research, event, and exhibition projects with us under the project titled Archive Außer Sich, Archives beside themselves. Not by chance, some of them are our neighbors and often collaborators at Silent Green Kulturquartier, where our archive is located. Savvy Contemporary, today represented by Linhan Balabat Helbock and Elena Quintarelli on my left. The Silent Green project Film Feld Forschung, represented by Nicole Wolf and myself. The Harun Farocki Institute, represented by Doreen Mende. The project also links us to a wider group of Wahlverwandte, such as the film production company Pong, represented by Mareike Bernin, here, which always also includes the archive when thinking about their films. The International Short Film Festival in Oberhausen, today represented by Tobias Hering, which, like us, houses an international film archive, and the master's program Film Culture, Archiving, Programming, Presentation at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, represented by Sonja Campanini, with whom we collaborate in a huge archive project in Nigeria, together with the NFC, the Nigerian Film Corporation, represented by Onche Daniel Eller, to her left, and Justina Omojeve Akborere, who's here with us, and Didi Chika and for the Lagos Film Society, who's in the audience, and the DFF Deutsches Filminstitut and Filmmuseum. Elsa de Sen will close the session today with a collective statement. Die Archive sind außer sich. The archives are beside themselves, which we can see not only in the fact that so many people are currently dealing with them. They call for counter-proposals for new contemporary constellations. They are in motion. They evade our terminologies and develop their own language, which we can best learn by listening to it. Trust the archive.
Thank you. Good evening. Colonial Neighbors is an archive and research project composed of material and immaterial traces that are linked in one way or the other to the colonial period of Germany. So I work with an archive that I highly mistrust. It's an ongoing participatory archive that investigates the colonial history of Germany, including its ongoing impacts upon the present. The project aims to address gaps in German politics in order to question dominant knowledges and knowledge productions and historical narratives. So the archive serves as a platform for discussion, exchange, and collaborations with actors from various fields. So following the concept of history as entanglement, the project aims at breaking historical dichotomies and drawing a more differentiated picture of current Lebenswelten in Berlin. Objects, everyday items, commercial products, or other traces of history, like words, songs, fragments of memories or oral histories, serve as intermediary for the project to narrate entangled histories between Germany, the African continent, China, and colonized areas in the Pacific. So over here you see a necklace by Emily Pütter. It's one of the objects I'm gonna going to say about this in a bit. It's, of course, an archive composed of very complicated dynamics. So partially as well because of the violence it contains. The objects are acquired through an open call. So to say, they find their ways through donations to our space, to Savi. And some have very personal attachments to the objects that have been in usage in their households. But some find simply racist images on packaging and bring it to our archive. So the focus lies not so much on the object itself, even though we try to do some research, of course, but we don't want to simply accumulate things that are connected to this period, but are more interested in the personal history behind the object. So this necklace here is one example of such. It was donated by the artist Emily Pütter, who had it in her family for many generations. It was passed on by her grandmother to her, actually great-grandmother, and she really didn't question the past of this object. But at an opening of Savi, she approached us and said that this necklace is made of ivory, and thinking about the conditions of how it must have been acquired and where it was from, she really did not want to have it anymore or be related to it or be related to its past. So how can one work with an archive that's composed by items that are not trustworthy? And we try to embrace the limited longevity of the objects, and we don't really exhibit anything behind glass. Or most of the objects are also really free to be touched, and things are therefore also decaying before our eyes. We have objects that are 100 years old, but we try to engage with the archive in a very open way. So we have also a series of interventions like the Fragment Series, where artists, activists, scholars, or even school classes, they're invited to be activated by the archive and to activate it and transform the objects and its narrative. So the goal is not really pointing the finger back in time and accuse someone else of violently annexing other people's lands, but to think of the continuations of structures that enable the abuse of power, and to think of how it would be perceived as well in the future, as many will be pointing the finger on us and asking how we could deny other people's rights of mobility, for example. So it's also meant to be a platform for collective memory. So through the stories behind the objects, we would like to enable a more broader view on how we're connected to this period and its ongoing repercussions.
Good evening. I'm going to talk about another archival project within Savi, which is Savi Doc. It's a documentation center and archive, part of Savi Contemporary, which hosts a broad number of publications, rare cultural and publications coming from all over the world. We generally deal with philosophy. We have a focus on philosophies from the non-West. And as I said, it is really hosting a multitude of texts. We have literature, but we have art magazines, political analysis, political theory, exhibition catalogs. So it's a very broad spectrum that we cover. Is the result of the everyday practice of Savi. So it's very much an archive in the making. It's constantly growing. It's constantly growing its diversity because of the donation that we receive, but also because it's very much based on the exhibitions and on the public programs that we have at Savi, and but also it's very much based on the rest of the activities that we do, so performance programs, readings, invocations, poetry, and we let ourselves grow in dialogue with also all the people that contributes to Savi, and the people that we meet from different walks of life that engage with our work and what we do. We decided to present one example from the Savi Doc archive, namely number 11 from Abia. Abia is part of what we call the special collections, which are very rare publications, journals, reviews, mainly coming from the African continent, but we also have some coming from the Caribbean as small acts. Most of these publications, they are coming from, they've been published in the period between the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, and they reflect upon paramount moments of cultural, social, and political transition in the African continent and abroad. And they engage with thinking about definitions and processes such as colonialism, culture, language, art from a Pan-African perspective. Some of these publications played a fundamental role in the political discussion of the newly independent African countries. This is the case of Abia, for example, which was published in Cameroon between 62 and 72, but also Peuple Noir, Peuple Africain, as well as in Europe. And this is the case of Présence Africaine, which was published in France, but through actors of the diasporical community. Others are still published today, and in this case, then Savi becomes a distribution point, a point of accessibility. And this is the case of Chimurenga, for example, from South Africa. These materials are, of course, very fundamental in understanding our global present, and we brought Abia number 11 exactly for this reason, because it opens with an essay from the founder, by the founder, Bernard Fonlon. And this essay is entitled The Idea of Culture, and this essay offers a very broad analysis on colonialism and on its erasing force on the culture of the colonized. And it does that by building through an incredibly rich wealth of contributions of sources, from Tacitus to Gandhi, from Horace to Aimé Césaire. So as you can understand, this is, of course, a very rare object, so we have a responsibility towards this object in the sense of try to preserve them, but they're also very precious in its content. That's why we're working in opening up our library, making it accessible as much as possible. We are working on a new digital online database and a website that will allow people from all over the world to have access to this text, especially people who cannot travel to Berlin and who will probably even never get a visa to come to Berlin. So we feel this responsibility. And I would like to close by reading a quote which is printed in each in the 4 page of each Abia issues, which inspires our work and express our motivations in what we do. The quote goes like that: not merely to recount what has been, but to share in molding what should be.
Thank you. So I speak for Film Feld Forschung at Silent Green, under the broadly conceived umbrella term metabolism. This project is conceived in 2 parts, and I speak to one and then hand over to Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus, who speaks of another. For now, I have no object and no image that can stand in or exemplify the archive I refer to. So I ask you to imagine, to speculate or remember matter, inorganic matter and organic matter, rocks, minerals, humus, air, water. Imagine a maybe familiar, delicious smell and texture of soil. Imagine, speculate or remember bacteria, fungi, mycorrhizae, earthworms, mites, nematodes, protozoa, mammals and humans. Also, petroleum, hydrocarbons, solvents, pesticides, herbicides, lead, electronic waste, sewage, industrial waste, soapy, slimy, and sluggy. Also ammunition, chemical weapons, radioactivity, mass graves of the disappeared. Also hundreds of years of sweat, blood, bodies of the enslaved, of the forced laborers, those driven from their land, the military occupied. What is the future archive that should be sought from this? Can we think of soil as an archival constellation, as an archival constellation of the future? And crucially, how do we share in molding this future archive? How do we account for the very singular relations or non-relations we have to soil, to archival constellations? What does the soil as archival constellation hold in store, keep safe, maybe hide, constantly process, maybe without us seeing it because we are not looking? What is held in the soil in singular places, right here where we are, at urban gardening sites struggling over public land, at former mining sites outside the city, on former plantation sites in Germany's colonies, in occupied Kashmir and Palestine. In all those places, mined, extracted, depleted, and sold. And can one not fetishize the soil, not fetishize the archive, but think actively from the matter and the matters it contains and does not contain? What perspectives would this ask for or open up? Could this be a planetary perspective, not the voice from above, not the voice from below, from besides, but from in the midst, entangled, simultaneously specific, and with an eye to difference? Can one think with agroforestry, with syntropy as a form of farming, where organic matter is constantly worked into the soil, leading to a more and more complex texture and composition of the soil? But, who is that one who has access to working the soil in this way? Who can really return to the land, to soil? Who has this kind of access? Access to this rich archival constellation, who can further domesticate or rewild? How would we act or think Edouard Glissant's aesthetics of the earth, his call to risk the earth? His claim to risk the earth is for us to complicate the places we find ourselves, to make it complicate ourselves as well. Glissant claims, passion for the land where one lives is a start, an action we must endlessly risk. Inspired by activists and farmers from the Caribbean, we might ask what methodology and what political practice can arise from there and from this risk. Philippa César, amongst others, has brought to our attention the relation between agronomy and liberation movements as actively thought by Amilcar Cabral, so how to think struggles from the edaphosphere, the sphere of the soil. What temporalities might we think and relate to when thinking with the constant process of composition and decomposition of soil, but also with its depletion, with the ruptures of its cycles, with the material and immaterial ruins it contains? What experimental practices for political struggles might emerge from the networks and battles and pluriverse relations taking place in and through soil? What potentials for repair and recovery might arise from soil? From living in and with ruins, in and with toxins, in and with inheritance and continuation of colonial and neoliberal structural adjustments, capture and erosion, in and with rupture and connection simultaneously. And how does one, how do I, not again exploit matter, but let it do its work? How to give the right to opacity to soil as well? So soil as archival constellation is a place, or rather processes and multiple diverse particles of struggles and crisis. We must risk it to share in molding what should be. Soil can also be a site of repair. It has capacities that exceed our imagination. Human species can support that repair, the succession that makes soil. But who gets to do the repair? What gets repaired? For whom and for what? Or how might the soil be ahead of us in being constantly engaged in repair while not forgetting, not reconciling, not redeeming, not coming to terms with its debris, but renewing while living in and with and despite and mutating through and with the layers of violence and struggles that make its very fabric? So I close with, we must risk the earth as present and future archival constellation and embodying always, continuously and simultaneously, repair and crisis, repair beyond redemption.
The Silent Green Kulturquartier is a relatively new venue and an independent project in the historic premises of the former wedding crematorium in Berlin. Founders Bettina Ellerkamp and Jörg Heidmann, who unfortunately can't be with us today, have been active as documentary filmmakers and cultural activists in Berlin since the early 90s, collectively creating spaces for independent culture. The former crematorium is listed in Berlin as a historically protected building. The grounds was used as a municipal cemetery between 1828 and 1879. Built between 1909 and 1910, it was the first crematorium in Berlin and the third in the former Prussia. Its presence testifies to changing cultural norms around death in the modernized Germany of the early 20th century. This change reflected the work of numerous freethinker movements at the end of the 19th century. Alongside civil marriages and undenominational education, the legal acceptance of cremation was one of the freethinkers' main goals. Between 1993 and 1996, the crematorium was expanded with the building of a massive, fully automatic underground mortuary of 1,200 square meters. Shortly thereafter, in 2002, it was shut down permanently to make way for the crematoriums at Baumschulenweg and in Ruhleben. Detached from the urn cemetery, it was put up for sale. Silent Green Kulturquartier conferred the contract, and the renovation started in 2013. In recognition of the protected status of the crematorium, its basic and external architecture has been preserved, whilst necessary modifications have been made inside that facilitate the new functions of the building. In 2014, the first tenants moved in, and the first cultural events took place in the renovated building. The Silent Green project, Film Feld Forschung, initiated by Bettina Ellerkamp, Jörg Heidmann, and myself, later joined by Nicole Wolf for the Stoffwechsel project, investigates the language of film through exhibition projects, discursive and performative formats, focusing on documentary practices at a time in which images have become far removed from their production contexts. With the Stoffwechsel, the metabolism project, Film Feld Forschung has set itself the goal of using the interior and exterior spaces of Silent Green for theoretical and practical research into the materiality of film and the soil as archive. As Nicole pointed out, Stoffwechsel considers diverse relations, materials, and temporalities in and with the soil. How can the tension between plundering and repairing be newly conceived for the perspectives of the moving image, cinema, and the understanding of archives? Nicole conceived a 2-week certified permaculture design course entitled Soil City Solidarity, which starts at the end of this month at Silent Green. Other upcoming projects include retrospectives of filmmakers Arthur and Corinne Cantrell, whose landscape films dignify the Australian outback and thus the living spaces of the indigenous population, and of Shinzuko Ogawa and his collective Ogawa Pro, who documented the struggle of farmers against the construction of Narita Airport on their land in the 1970s, and later lived in a mountain village where they first focused on farming before they continued their filmmaking practice. It also includes discussions on the material and symbolic composition of Earth in occupied territories, a workshop on organic film processing, and an outdoor exhibition by the Australian Carabin Collective. For 2020, an exhibition is planned on a film that was shown in the Forum in 1991. The Garden, by Derek Jarman, was one of the cinematic key experiences for the Film Feld Forschung members in the way it opened the Möglichkeitsraum of cinema and its archives, its endless field of possibilities through metabolism.
The project I'm going to talk about is called Weltspiegel, and is also part of a metabolism, but more connected to television. It's a project I'm developing together with Merle Kröger, who unfortunately can't be here. So Weltspiegel is a documentary archive, a biographical archive and a web documentary on the television journalist called Navina Sundaram. If we look at this project as a living, growing body of work, its roots are reaching out widely, touching the historical, ethical, and political crossroads of 20th century media, especially television. We can state that television, as in Germany mostly public institutional body, is a metabolism in itself. Especially in the documentary genre, but also in fiction, it has its short and already ending lifespan, eaten reality, transformed it into our awareness of a global present, and digested it into history. The relevant question is not if this history is shit or soil for something new to grow. It's rather what happens inside the body, the institutional body, the archival body, the container of human bodies and minds. Navina Sundaram worked as a political television editor, a foreign correspondent and a moderator for the Northern Television channel NDR and for the first public program RRD in Germany. Grown up in the independent Republic of India, she came to Hamburg in the mid-60s because she was invited for a 2-year internship at the Northern Television Studios. There she continued to work, permanently employed for over 30 years. During this time, she produced numerous documentaries, reports, and commentaries on Southern Asia, the failure of traditional development policies, issues of migration in Germany, and feminist subjects. A few of the reports you can see in the back. These documentaries all became part of an archival body of public television. As you might know, the archives of public television in Germany are no public archives. It is very hard to enter if you're not a scientist or journalist. And even then, you must know already in advance what you want, be lucky that it still exists, and invest a lot of money for copying purposes. And in spite of all these barriers, or in fact because of them, we are planning to intervene into this archival metabolism and extract the works which were produced, edited, or written by Navina to create a publicly open online archive. By extracting her work, we do not want to undertake the work of a television institution, but we think that within the work of Navina, specific perspectives are entangled, which should not become fully digested or disappear. To take her point of view, to put her reports, contributions, and films in the center of attention, means to look at German television history from an insider's-outsider's perspective, as she calls it. It is this perspective in which migration, media history, Cold War, class question, and feminism are entangled, and which also points to the fact that the history of media and the history of migration are deeply intertwined. Most of Sundaram's films, although English is her native language, and many of her films have been shot originally in English, are today only available in German, dubbed version, because they have been digested by television. Therefore, we will show you a clip which is on the one hand very atypical for her work, because it's a cultural and not a political reportage. On the other hand, the story of the film itself is a very typical one. It was shot on 60mm and broadcasted on December 27th, 1974. The 60mm reversal film master went into the NDR archives. In the metabolism process, it was transferred to 1-inch magnetic tape, and the 60mm original was destroyed, without informing Navina, who was employed by the station at the same time. When the second migration from 1-inch to digibeta took place, someone decided that the magnetic tape was not worth to be further archived. Death sentence. One merciful prison guard archivist called Navina, in fact, left the tape on the table and went for the loo. The tape, although she had no legal copyrights, went home with her and ended up on a shelf. But the life of magnetic tape is short. When we started this project, the tape was almost dead. It was sticking together, image and sound were off sync, and constantly breaking down. A hopeless case. Then we heard of a special laboratory from an antiquated video system. The ZKM in Karlsruhe calls the scientific department a modern Noah's Ark for media arts. What they did? The VCR tape was cleaned and parts of the cassette, which had already been corroded, were replaced. The video was then played from VCR recorder and digitized into 4:3 uncompressed 10-bit data. So what we are going to see now, it's a 3-minute clip, it's from Navina Sundaram, and it's called Reden ist meine Droge, Sing mein Sex, Ashaputli von 1974.
Is real. Real is love. Love is feeling. Feeling love. Love is wanting to be loved. Love is touch. Touch is love. Love is reaching, reaching love. Love is asking to be loved. Love is you. You and me. Love is knowing. We can be, we can be, we can be. Love is free. Free is love. Love is living, living love. Love is asking to be loved.
So talking is my drug, singing my sex. One of the first ideas for this project was to write a book about an extraordinary female life and career. But talks with Navina Sundaram led to watching films, and watching films led to astonishment. Do we already forget that television in the 1970s and 80s had been more progressive, more radical, and much more interesting formally than any broadcasted format of today, including the internet? The first necessity was we need to see the films, and then we need to make them accessible. We went into endless negotiations with the NDR, and in the end, held in our hands an agreement about more than 70 films, short clips and moderations. The sheer number demanded a kind of online mediathek, a film library to be used as a pool for guided tours through 4 decades of contemporary German and international history, and through a personal body of work at the same time. In addition to Navina's own film material, we plan to add a second layer to the archive, which will function as a commentary structure. In the last half year, we started to conduct interviews with Navina herself, and we are planning to ask other filmmakers, former colleagues and journalists, to comment on the specific material. By inserting this comment structure into the archive, different temporalities start to coexist. The archive television and the news report that speak of a constantly updated present and the past, and a commentary structure which provokes and traces echoes to this past into the very political present. By implementing these double layers, we want to activate the material and take the archive as a point of view, not only to look at German media history from a specific angle, but also to look at our present and possible futures, which will turn the archive into a place of production. So I want to end with 4 questions. What can we learn from these old materials? What kind of temporality beyond linear progress does it provoke? What does it mean to look at this material from a perspective of today? And how is the material looking back at us?
The reselected project, which I'm here to introduce you to, is based on research in the archive of the International Short Film Festival Oberhausen, which was founded in 1954 and had just had its 65th edition a few weeks ago. The research focuses on the collection of analog film prints, which were regularly acquired when a film won an award from one of the festival's official juries. The project is interested in the material, often contingent, sometimes idiosyncratic aspects generated by the fact that films circulated as prints, that each print has had a unique itinerary, traces of which can be found in the archive as well as on the print itself. No two prints of the same film are ever exactly the same. At times they even differ considerably, as we could see last night if you attended the screening of the two different language versions of Night and Fog. One of the project's key slogans, therefore, is "Jede Kopie ist ein Original." Every print or copy is an original. In order to appreciate the uniqueness of an archive print and its itinerary, I must take into account the festival's extensive paper archives, including not only the festival's own publications and printed outputs, but also press clippings and photos, and a few hundred folders of correspondences, letters, telegrams, telexes, later emails, and especially and interestingly, a vast collection of film dialogue lists produced over the years for live translation during a festival screening. It is from these, some of these elements that I will now try to put together a short glimpse into the archival environment of the reselected project. I have chosen to focus on a film by Lebanese filmmaker Jocelyn Saab, who had sadly passed away in January this year. The Oberhausen archive holds two prints of films by Jocelyn Saab: Les Enfants de la Guerre, The Children of the War, a film from 1976, of which the archive acquired a new 16mm print a few years ago, and Beirut Ma Ville, Beirut My City, from 1982, of which there is a vintage 16mm print in the archive, and of which I hope we will be able to acquire a new print in the course of this project. The film dialogue is in French, and the print has no subtitles. It was, and still is, common practice in Oberhausen that films that come without subtitles are being translated simultaneously during the projection by live speakers via headphones. So if you know the festival, know this practice for sure. Some of you have probably get the German translation right now over headphones too. This has resulted in a vast collection of text lists, most of which are of films that are not part of the archive themselves. Before actually watching the 16mm print of Beirut Ma Ville for the first time, I had by chance come across the German and English text lists in this paper archive, which had been used for this translation and live speaking purpose when the film was screened in Oberhausen in 1983. I liked this text very much, even though I later realized that, of course, the translations do not fully convey the poetic quality of the original French text. I took a special interest in this text, however, since I felt that what it said about life in the ruins of a city where memories have become displaced and where sometimes one must learn to forget images in order to be able to imagine a reality for oneself in the future, that these reflections on how to deal with the sometimes ludicrous gap between what was lost and what remains can be read as a message from the archive about the archive. And I more and more actually get the impression that every object in an archive always also speaks about or represents the archive. You will now hear excerpts from the soundtrack of Beirut Ma Ville. In the first part, the voice of Jocelyn Saab herself, speaking from the ruins of her house in Beirut, which is the first 2 minutes of the film. And afterwards, a male voice speaking a text written by Lebanese playwright and actor Roger Assaf. Possibly the voice we hear is his own, but I haven't been able to confirm this yet.
Voilà, c'est ma maison, c'est ce qu'il en reste. Et je ne peux plus vous parler des autres. C'est cynique, mais... Voilà, là c'était ma chambre. Là nous préparions un film. C'était 2 étages. Au fond, c'est pas grave parce que ce n'est que des murs après tout. Et nous sommes tous sortis vivants. À penser le nombre de morts qu'il y a depuis quelques jours, d'une part à cause des bombardements des Israéliens, à cause des bagarres intérieures. Je ne sais pas, on se demande, je me pose des questions. L'essentiel, c'est de survivre, de vivre. C'est vrai que cette maison, c'est la tradition, que ça me fait quelque chose au cœur, que c'est 150 ans d'histoire. C'est mon identité aussi. C'est comme pour tout le monde, c'est l'identité de tous les Libanais qui perdent leur maison, leurs biens. En plus, comme on ne sait pas à qui se référer, on ne sait plus qui on est.
Quand tout cela a-t-il commencé? Un samedi noir ou un avril funeste, il y a quelques années. La guerre a pris son temps, ou plutôt elle a pris notre temps. Une tranche de vie escamotée, de sorte que pour beaucoup d'entre nous, entre l'enfance et la maturité, il y a un mot qui manque, le mot jeunesse. Aujourd'hui, les dates se brouillent, les images se mesurent, s'affrontent l'espace d'un réveil pour acquérir la forme que prendra la mémoire quand les apparences auront disparu. Tout ce qui est vide est plein. C'est ça la guerre. Les bombes font des trous, des vides, des tombes. Et la vie afflue. Elle remplit les vides partout où la mort se voulait définitive. Chaque lieu devient une histoire. Chaque nom devient une mémoire. Qu'il est long le chemin qui sépare ce qui est éprouvé de ce qui est dit et ce qui est dit de ce qui est perçu. Les mots peinent, s'essoufflent, l'indicible est plus fort. Quand le malheur devient spectacle, on l'a déjà trompé. On est déjà touriste au pays des souffrances. La mesure de la compassion n'est pas celle de la douleur. Et devant les décombres d'un immeuble bombardé, une distance indéfinissable sépare celui qui est ému à cause de ce qu'il voit de celui qui pleure à cause de ce qu'il ne voit plus. Mais le destin nous réservait encore le revers d'une image dont on croyait avoir fait le tour. Tous les coins et les recoins, à portée de balle ou d'obus, avaient connu la marque de chacune des multiples guerres que nous avions vécues. L'espace des images n'a que 2 dimensions. Il faut frapper beaucoup plus fort pour les déraciner. Il faut, comme dit une expression arabe, agir avec comme si elle n'avait jamais existé. Il faut faire qu'elle soit défaite. Il faut terroriser les images pour que les hommes choisissent de les oublier.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, Markus, and the translator, everyone here on the panel, and you for staying also on this Saturday afternoon. No, it's not Saturday yet. It's Wednesday. Sorry, it doesn't matter. It feels like Saturday. Allow me to introduce and share with you a few thoughts on our research into the research material of the project Prison Images by the filmmaker and writer Harun Farocki and Katie Lee Crane from the late 1990s of the last century. It will enable us to propose a few reflections on the political economy of the archive with regard to the entanglement of race, technology, law, and capital with regard to the image. We certainly would join the demand for a priceless archive, an archive free of charge. However, free access to public archives, or any archive for that matter, doesn't and should not, we would say, do away with a certain wager and or weight, that is, a political wager and or an ethical weight. The following will be, if implicitly, a reflection on the political and the ethical price to pay approaching and entering the archive. For our brief glimpse at the archive and into our research in the context of the Archival Außer Sich network, we've decided to pick a piece of surveillance footage that was shot already in 1989 in the maximum security prison in Corcoran in California and archived by a lawyer representing the families of prisoners being killed and harmed in that prison, who gave it to Harun Farocki and Katie Lee Crane in the late 1990s when Farocki was teaching in California in Berkeley. It was used prominently in Farocki's installation, I Thought I Was Seeing Convicts, as well as in the TV version entitled Prison Images, both made at the turn of the millennium. A number of things seem significant and worth emphasizing to us. I would like only to touch on 8 points here. First, the Dictionary of Cinematic Gestures. Within the material that Farocki left and which constituted the starting point of the Harun Farocki Institute's archive in 2015, this is a small fragment of a larger cluster of research material. The material researched, gathered, and collected by Harun Farocki, Katie Lee Crane, Jörg Becker, and others was meant to develop a comprehensive iconography of the prison and prison life in film history. This particular archival research had been the starting point of the project that should be another chapter in Farocki's quest to build a dictionary of cinematic gestures, which he began to make public with his work on one of the primal scenes of film history, the image of the factory gate and the workers leaving the factory. Point 2, the image as a heterogeneous network of visualities, of material visualities. The boxes in Harfi's, Harun Farocki Institute's archive that constitute the base and background of the Prison Images project also contain promotional material from the prison industrial complex and critical documentation from legal activist backgrounds, such as the footage of the shooting of William Martinez in Corcoran, a Supermax California state prison. Point 3, the unedited. Farocki and Crane who said at the time that they were provided with the material by a lawyer of the victims' families, may have as well taken this material from the 1997 video documentary Maximum Security University, which compiled footage of 5 shooting deaths of inmates at Corcoran Prison in the period from the late 1980s to 1996. The videos in Maximum Security University are unedited. It quotes from there. They depict inmates going to an enclosed security housing unit, SHU, a yard, where they were fighting with one another. The guard, who is holding a 9mm gun in a booth overlooking the SHU yard, then shoots and murders one of the fighting inmates. Over the years, hundreds of inmates were involved in set-up fights, and 50 were shot and wounded. One was rendered a quadriplegic. 5 died. Point 4, death. Depending on the circumstances in which it is being shown and watched, the clip documenting William Martinez's fight, an eventual death, thus opens the view on a certain archival complexity, if not an abyssal archivality. For the surveillance tapes in their visible and invisible entirety constitute an archive. The Maximum Security University video and the educational awareness rising legal practices associated with it constitute another archive, constitute another archive. The research conducted by Farocki and Crane constitutes again another archive. I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost now. Yeah, and it provides a potential entry into this archive, so this abyssal archivality. Point 5. The outlawed. The surveillance footage also interests us for its volatility. For a long time, such material had been archived, sometimes not, sometimes depending on the whimsy of the prison staff, sometimes depending on storage capacities, sometimes depending on legislation. Due to the growing data volumes and storage spaces, more and more images are being stored to be parsed, browsed, mined forever. Point 6. Repurposing surveillance. The Corcoran footage has been originally produced for the purpose of panopticist surveillance, the programming of violence among prisoners by authorities. If not as downright snuff material to cater the white supremacist voyeurism on the prison guards. However, it has been and may continue to be of relevance as legal evidence mobilized against this very system of exploitation, racism, corruption, and sadism. At least potentially, it contributes to a repository of visual material that might have and probably will enable lawyers, advocacy groups, and activists to make their case against specific instances of criminal behavior and negligence on the side of the prison industry, and against the carceral state in general. It is thus one element in an operational chain holding specific functions, be it in the service of the policing powers, be it in the service of an activist counter-investigation. Point 7. Carceral visuality. Harun Farocki writes in Kontrollblicke, a text from 1999 surrounding his research on prison images, and I quote, "The surveillance cameras run at a slower speed in order to save on costs. In the footage available to us, the intervals were extended so that the movements are jerky and not flowing. The fights in the yard look like something from a cheap computer game. It is hard to imagine a less dramatic representation of death." Quote end. The Cochrane video footage and the way Farocki used it in 1999-2000 anticipates his work on computer games with Parallele 1 bis 4 of 2012 to 2014, and thus inform another archival constellation. Research into carceral visuality or carceral aesthetics yields research into virtual visualities as real virtualities. From within the archive emerged the elements of an archive of gaming and dehumanization, of prison guards placing bets on deadly gladiator fights on the prison yard to the surrealism and world building of eco-shooter games. Point 8, last point. Operational cross-temporality. Photographic and post-photographic images have always been and will become increasingly operational. The image as an operation, as Harun Farocki famously argued, that is, images to be used for purposes that lie beyond watching them through human eyes. The ongoing integration of surveillance and gaming is an important part of this development of relegating the processing of images to machines and their functions of control, storage, and production. In closing, we would thus like to raise the question of how this very operationality of images, their state of always already being implemented, serving in socio-technical apparatuses, could be successfully addressed in archival work. It implies reflection on the operationalization of images that is taking place in archives. It makes necessary to direct a politics of the archive or a political economy of the archive towards issues of the past, present, future usages and operationalities of the images it holds. It demands the consideration of all the qualities and features of images that cannot be categorized merely in terms of their objecthood. Hence, an archive of images should also be an archive of operations and operationalities. Thank you.
Good evening. Our participation to the project Filmkultur Außer Sich has the title, Archive Außer Sich has the title Filmkultur Außer Sich, Film Culture Beyond Itself. And it consists of a collaboration between Nigerian and German institutions with the aim of building a university master program on film culture and film archiving in Jos in Nigeria. The program will be the first of its kind in the African continent and will be offered by the University of Jos in cooperation with the National Film Institute of Nigeria. At Goethe University, in the Department of Theatre, Film and Media Studies, we offer since 2013 the master program Film Culture, Archiving, Programming and Presentation, in the frame of which we closely collaborate with film culture institutions such as the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art in Berlin and the DFF, Deutsches Filminstitut and Film Museum in Frankfurt. The first steps in establishing our collaboration with the Nigerian institution dated to 2016, when the Goethe Institute and Didi Cheka, a Nigerian filmmaker and founding member of the Lagos Film Society, who is also here tonight, invited Stephanie Schulte-Strathaus and Markus Ruff from Arsenal to Lagos to evaluate archival materials held at the Nigerian Film Corporation, the former Nigeria Film Unit. Among the film cans, Didi Chika found the reels of Shau Umar, a film by Adamu Halilu produced in Nigeria in 1967, which was considered to be lost. Due to the missing technical infrastructure in Nigeria, the film has been restored in Germany by Arsenal in collaboration with the Nigerian Film Corporation and presented at the Berlinale in 2018. In that occasion, the first knowledge exchanges on film archiving took place between the staff of Arsenal and the one of National Film, Video and Sound Archive in Jos. With funding from Federal Foreign Office within the Cultural Heritage Program, Arsenal installed a film scanner at the National Film, Video and Sound Archive and conducted the first training workshop. The rediscovery of Che humor raised awareness on the topic of preservation and presentation of old movies between Nigerian institutions. The personnel of the National Archive has expertise in the analog domain, but not in the digital one, since there is no policy for digitization of film and video materials. To fill this gap, in 2016, the Nigerian Film Institute organized a workshop on film heritage, inviting again Stefanie Schulte-Stratos from Arsenal and Professor Vincent Sediger from the Goethe University. In this frame, the Nigeria Film Institute manifested the wish to establish a master program for training personnel in the field of film archiving and film culture. Given our involvement within the Film Culture Master Program at Goethe University, Vincent Sediger and I started our collaboration with Nigerian institution in order to share our experiences and ideas for establishing a similar master program in JOS. The project Film Archival Studies Master Program JOS is founded by DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, in the framework of the Transnationale Bildung Initiative and takes place in the course of 4 years from 2018 to 2022. Our aim is to establish a collaboration network between German and Nigerian institutions that enable knowledge exchanges in order to develop the master program in JOS. The program should train academic staff for film and media archives and institution of film culture, with the aim to preserve and give access to the audiovisual heritage of Nigeria and West Africa. Graduates from the master may work in different fields of film culture, such as film archives, film museum, film festivals, film and media education, but also in the film industry. A number of German and Nigerian institutions are involved in the project, as you can see in the slide. The Film Studies Department of Goethe University in Frankfurt, together with the Deutsches Filminstitut and Film Museum and the Arsenal from the German side. In Nigeria, our partners are the Nigerian Film Corporation, the National Film Institute of Nigeria, the University of Jos, the National Film and Sound Archive in Jos, and the Lagos Film Society. The development of the project comprises elements of intensive knowledge exchanges between the partners involved. During the 2-month Training the Trainers fellowships, Nigerian specialists in film archiving will be trained at the German partner institutions. The training involves technical aspect, archival project management, and database work. The trained staff will take on tasks at the National Film, Video and Sound Archive and teach in the master program at the University of Jos. In addition, teachers from Goethe University and experts from Arsenal and the DFF will be co-teaching with academic staff of the UniJOS to develop and implement the various modules of the program. Mutual internship and exchanges for students of both degree programs are part of the project as well. The intention of the project goes beyond the mere knowledge transfer. It is indeed a knowledge exchange going in both directions. We at Goethe University are actively engaging with the Nigerian film culture and plan to establish a research and teaching focus on Nigerian film. In this exchange process, we are also questioning many theoretical and practical principles informing our master program. We do experience to what extent concepts, ideas, and practice that we consider general or even universal in our teaching are indeed very much influenced by local contexts and frameworks. We face the fact that the matter is not just to decolonize the archive, but also to decolonize our knowledge about the archive. I leave now the word to Daniel Lonche and Justine Omojewe Aparkeke, the 2 fellows that are completing the fellowship in Frankfurt.
Good evening, and thank you all. Mine is just a statement of hope and excitement about international corporations, about what is happening about film archival in Nigeria. Although film arrived early in Nigeria in 1903, the first film was screened in Nigeria, but not much has been achieved in terms of archival practice in Nigeria. For instance, Nigeria at this moment, with a population of about 200 million, we have only about 5 archivists to cover the whole country. So you can see that not much has been achieved. But we also see from the film culture in Nigeria that film is mainly seen as majorly entertainment. And so there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of commercialization. And so people come in with the aim of making money and not so much of leaving a cultural heritage for the people. So, but we hope with the archival studies that is coming up that a lot is going to change in Nigeria, especially with the cooperation between filmmakers, archivists, theater artists, and others who are involved in film. Because these people need to understand themselves for film archival to grow in Nigeria. If they don't understand themselves, if the theater person does not understand, the archivists do not understand the filmmakers, it cannot grow in our country. So we hope that this collaboration is going to grow. And with the digitization of the film Shehu Umar by Arsenal Berlin, you know, a lot of excitement is on in the country. People are happy about this issue. And then again, the collaboration that is coming between Goethe University and other institutions to start this archival studies in Nigeria, we are hoping that so much is going to come into place. And because of that, Nigeria is expecting a whole lot of change for archival practice in Nigeria. And we hope in the next few years, the world will know that something has started in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Film archiving in Nigeria, moving towards the mark. The clips showing was digitized by the National Film Video and Sound Archive in Nigeria using the donated scanner by the German government through the Arsenal Film Institute for Film and Arts. The National Film Video and Sound Archive was established by the Nigerian Film Corporation in 1992, and it has in its holding over 20,000 cans of films with historical values, comprising of political films, educational films, newsreels, feature films, etc. The oldest film in the National Film Video and Sound Archive is dated back 1956 with the title Nigeria Great a Queen, indicating that there is a historical gap in our collection if the production of film started in 1926 in Nigeria. The question is, where are these films? Another challenge is lack of awareness among filmmakers about the existence of Nigerian National Film Archive, and also lack of confidence that the archive will be able to protect their rights and privacy content of the films, therefore refusing to deposit their films with the archive. The experience so far during the training program will be of immense benefit to film archiving in Africa, since it's the first of its kind by addressing present and future challenges in archival management, studies, and research. One of such benefits is the opening of research channels to bridge the historical gap in our collection. Also, the training of scientific personnel in film archiving will help to establish a policy and practice for the preservation of national film heritage and making them accessible. Our exposure to the different worlds of archival practices in Germany will as well help in the organizational structure of the National Film Video and Sound Archive, making the job well-defined and more interesting for film archivists. Through this collaboration and the Masters in Film Archiving in Nigeria and Africa as a whole is marching to see a new dawn. Thank you.
In closing our presentation, we would like to add a few general remarks concerning the politics of research and production underlying the work of Archiv Außer Sich. The past 2 years of our collaboration entailed numerous discussions about the political nature of the archive and the necessity to come to terms with a radical archival politics that is actually responsive with regard to the always already contested space of the archive. In different ways, we are occupied both with existing individual archives and the work of instituting archival environments beyond and against archival institutions. Though our emphasis clearly lies on the performativity of the archive. Our individual interests and inquiries pertain to dynamic and volatile relationalities rather than static and proprietary forms of archival operations. Instead of privileging the sanctioned routines of collecting and conserving, or blindly subscribing to always already nationalist notions of cultural heritage, and to the obligation to keep rather than share, we prefer to be invested in processual modes, in constant claims to public access, and in the project of decolonialization. The politics of the archive are politics of knowledge, and as we understand them, such politics have to take into account the fact that our knowledges, are situated, that our epistemologies are messy and embodied, and that we don't own the archives since they own us. If, as several of us argue in their presentations, archives are metabolism, the ecologies of transformation are to be considered as part of a politics of research and aesthetic production in flux. There is no such thing as a stable identity of archival content, nor is it to be desired. Rigorously conceived as metabolistic, archives lose all what may have remained of their authority as holders of identitarian certainties, which is not the same thing as to say that archives don't need protection. The vulnerability of archives should be as much part of the conversation as should be their notorious power. The very terms of accessibility and protectiveness are in constant motion, and accordingly these terms and the archival practices they denote are to be negotiated, questioned, and if necessary, defended.
Thank you. I would like to mention that there are more of us in this room, not just at this table. Markus Ruff, for example, for Karl Pantenburg. Are there any questions or comments? Nothing? Well, I just hear the word wine next to me.
Or like
there's
water.
No,
I have a question. Thank you very much for the extremely verified, but nevertheless quite pointed presentation. I have a question related to access, because that came up so often. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What could that actually mean in terms of a material which needs sometimes a lot of knowledge before you can actually access it, and it has a very sort of specific form of care and so on? Maybe, you could elaborate on that a little bit.
I think access is very crucial for all of us, and I can only speak, I'm sure everyone has to say something about that. For us at the Arsenal, a very important step was really to move to silent green, and so far that we could, that we can now provide facilities like viewing tables, editing tables, where people can research the analog material. Usually most film archives are very protective. It's changing now, it's not as it used to be, but still you don't let people in. Our idea is, as I said in the beginning, there are many ideas behind that. One is, very important one is that we consider everyone who comes to our archive not, as it is often seen, as potential criminals who take something away, but these are people who bring something to us, which is knowledge often that we need. For example, when someone comes and tells us that we have the only surviving print of a film, then we have a different kind of responsibility. And also together with these people, they often come with a context in which they research, curatorial, artistic, or academic context, which often helps us in collaboration with them to realize projects and even raise money to digitize and restore the films, which we can otherwise not do so easily since we are not a National Heritage Archive and don't get. So we need really people. We need people to come. Also, lots of people think all the films are now digital, which is really not true. We estimate that it's maybe 5% of what was ever shot in the world that has been digitized, and some of that only is online, is available online. So if we really want to give an idea of the amount of films that have been produced in the world, we have to go analog as well at the same time and to create that access. So without creating access, and access often in film is considered like is at the end of the activities, like you digitize something in order to make it accessible, whereas we believe the access has to start with the access. And the access is a very productive element in what we do. So for us, we need the access to keep the films alive and to make them new films, the old films, and to escape the hierarchy of the old and the new. But I'm sure that everyone here has different things to say.
Perhaps we also can speak about different materialities of access, or different kind of Aggregatzustände. For example, with films by Harun Farocki, for him it was very important that they are not like the films just lingering online. I mean, there are like excerpts that could be traced on Mobi or on YouTube or like on certain platforms, which is not necessarily to keep control in this kind of an economic sense, different, like situated for us at the Institute. Also, I should add, at the Institute we take care of everything that is around the actual films. So we have the boxes of the research material, but the films themselves are with the GBR, which is like the legal estate, following estate of Farocki's film production company. So I think we have to think that we are working on a database that is accessible online, but not necessarily like all the documents per se, which we read now a text by Elizabeth Povinelli, Women on the Other Side, the Post-Colonial Archive in a Digital Kind of Era. We are living in cognitive capitalism and so on. We would like to understand this question of access also as a social contract, let's put it that way. So when people come to us and ask for material, of course, this is absolutely no problem. And I mean, everyone invited to work with that, also as a social kind of responsibility or as a social kind of exchange and conversation. So, but in order to facilitate that, I think this kind of different temporalities, materialities of access, I would like to bring forward in that conversation, perhaps. I mean, yeah.
Oh. Cool?
Yeah.
Maybe we can add that for our archive this year it was really the year of making it accessible, because we realized that we have all this material and even the people working in SAVI could not access it, exactly because there was not somehow an archival system, but also because the space was, I mean, SAVI Contemporary is a space that does a lot of different activities, but is also an art space, so people are mainly coming to see the exhibitions, and then they were bumping into the archive and asking a lot of questions about it. So we decided to dedicate a day only for people to access the library. And As Stephanie said, this brought a lot of contribution because, of course, people are coming with a specific interest, and so they actually add up to the archive and to our experience. But for us, it's very important, this online platform, because, of course, the issues we deal with are very relevant for Berlin and for Europe, but most of the time we have material that are relevant also for people who really don't have access to Europe physically. So it's very important for us to start a new conversation online and also to join forces with people that are also dealing with the same kind of topics that we deal with. So for us, it's somehow a very important goal, somehow fundamental in our archive. But also regarding colonial neighbors, maybe you can say something. I mean, you also work educationally in a matter of accessibility, no?
So yeah, so just short, because I think if we all try to elaborate on that. So the two natures of the two archives are very different. So here with the Savidoc, I don't work in the Savidoc, and so we have this open day, and when people take very rare editions, I think like, did they wash their hands, or are they giving it back? And sometimes books are really missing, and it's very painful. Whereas in our collection, through the act of donation, like we have access to it. And it's something like we try to go away from this conservative way of archiving, so we also ask these questions like who can access it, when, how, and all this. But you know, since the objects are very violent, it's like you deal with food that's off, and it's not about the food per se, but the bellyache that you want to deal with, you know. So it's about the collective memory and the penetration about this, and so we also try to think about this collection as something. Problematic is a very absurd word, but you know, we have science fiction, pornography, and then you have these colonial thingies, and we try to not fetishize the objects, but kind of like take it as a platform. And so, as Elena Quintarelli said, we take the objects or the access to the object as a point of departure and try to see in different formats, like with school classes, what they do with it, or artists, or even people who just walk in and have all different kinds of motivations, like why they're attached and connected to these objects. Yeah.
I would like to point out that we have this flyer with two hands using an editing table, and on the one hand you find the word access written, and on the other hand it says access. Mm-hmm. And this is a flyer with some of the films that we digitized. Maybe you would like to say something about it?
Well, our archive actually provide access to all the materials. Whoever wants to come to the archive to access the materials. And I believe that this digitization will actually help us because most of our materials are not viewable. We actually assisted a UK research student in December using the scanner. We scanned some clips of films for her to assist her in her research. And we also assisted her to access pioneer cameraman that was working with the Federal Film Unit before it was turned to Nigerian Film Corporation. So access is free and free to the public, to stakeholders, to students. We have the National Film Institute. They come at will, and we are ready to help. The archive is open in Nigeria. Thank you.
Maybe just because it was an interesting relation now to speak about access as free, and you were speaking about the political and the ethical price of accessing the archive. So I think it's a quite nice sort of span of approaches to access, as in the actual access of being able to see something, and the access of in terms of the responsibility that we take when we enter, which I was trying to refer to in terms of the risk that we take also when we access.
Ja.
Dann würde ich sagen, jetzt sind die Archive weiter außer sich und wir gehen alle vielleicht draußen noch was trinken und können uns weiter unterhalten. Vielen Dank
fürs Kommen und fürs Zuhören und